All right, so today I get to talk about the Phillips curve. Um, it's one of the last graphs we'll get to talk about, and it's going to be another one of the graphs where we end up relating it back to a lot of the other subjects, so it's pretty fun. It's got some very direct relations with the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, as we'll come to see, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the Phillips curve, what is it, who made it, stuff like that. This isn't super duper important as far as the curriculum goes, but it's good to know. So an economist, Mr. Phillips there, he looked at a historic analysis of the relationship between unemployment and inflation rates. And pretty much what he finds out is that as unemployment goes up, inflation goes down. Or as inflation goes up, um, unemployment goes down. Or I might have said the same thing twice there. But either way, the point is they have an inverse relationship. They don't go the same direction almost ever. Now, it can happen. It's just usually because something else very, very bad is going on. So that said, we're also going to see some other terms thrown around now, like this word Keynesian. Keynesian in general is an approach to economics created by, well, John Maynard Keynes, again, another important economist. And with that, pretty much what Mr. Phillips here says with his Phillips curve, as we'll see, we'll look at it here in a second, is that he says that when you're making policy, to keep this in mind. Just because you're making inflation go down doesn't mean that there's not going to be consequences, or vice versa. So let's go ahead and look at some more of what this would look like. So the Phillips curve then. So this is kind of how he came to his conclusion here. So he was plotting it all on a graph. And he's noticing that it has this, well, essentially a downward sloping tendency, meaning again that they have this this negative or inverse relationship here. As one goes up, the other goes down. So for America, as we've talked about, like ours would be like 5 to be somewhere around here, right? Because again, we want about 5% inflation, or sorry, 5% unemployment and 2% inflation, somewhere along that point. So what the Phillips curve will look like then is just downward sloping. Now, of all the graphs that we draw in here, this will be one of the more realistic looking ones when we actually draw it. This will be one like it'll be actually curved because it's an important part of understanding the Phillips curve, as we'll get to see here in a second. So that said, like I said, this isn't always true though, kind of. So in the 1970s, we're going to experience this thing that'll come to be coined as stagflation. Ideally, you would have talked about this in U.S. history, though last year, given the whole state of affairs and all that, you probably didn't really get to it. At least I know I didn't in my class. So that said, what it is it's a period where there is both high unemployment and high inflation. Now, when that first came about, they couldn't really figure out why that is. They're saying that it breaks the Phillips model, stuff like that. Now, eventually, what they realize is that it actually all makes sense because of this thing that they come to coin as the long-run Phillips curve. Now, with that, this little bottom part, Bretton Woods system, we don't need to worry about that. But pretty much the idea with the long run Phillips curve then is that there's a point that we can get to where inflation and unemployment will have this very obvious even trade-off. But once we pass that point, that's when we start seeing huge trade-offs for it, and we start getting really crazy numbers of both with our stagflation here. So that said, our long run Phillips curve then will be another vertical line. All right, so again, our short run Phillips curve, I forgot to mention that. So this will be our Phillips curve, or our SRPC, sometimes short run Phillips curve, is downward sloping. And just to explain the labelings here, off to our left, we have our inflation, and down here we have our unemployment. Now, here we have our long run Phillips curve. And this is our natural rate of unemployment, is what it represents. The percentage is what it represents, right? So again, for us, for the United States, it'd be like over here by 5%. And in other countries, they all have different natural rates of unemployment like we've talked about. So the natural rate of unemployment then is held constant in this, and that is why it is going to be a vertical line there, which isn't to say it's going to be like our other graphs where we're always operating along it. So it's going to exist there, again, natural rate of unemployment. So what we'll see then is things that change the structure of the economy itself are things that end up impacting the long run Phillips curve. So really the best example of it, because this is things that are going to change the natural rate of unemployment, or could be things that change the our long run aggregate supply, to bring that back to the aggregate model. But these will be huge structural changes for things like this. One of the best examples for it is the invention of the internet. Prior to the internet, in order to find a job, what did you have to do? Right? You had to actually go out, leave your house, go around to different businesses and talk to them and try to find a job that way. But now with the internet, it's much easier, right? You can send out 30 job applications without leaving your house. So big deal there. Some other structural changes that we might see could be the government itself, right? Like there's a reason why some countries have a much higher natural rate of unemployment than the United States does. It's because they have much, stronger social safety nets, right? Stuff like unemployment insurance. In places like the Scandinavian area, I mean, their natural rate of unemployment is up to like 14%, because it's people actually have time to go and find a new job, one that actually suits them, stuff like that. So we're going back to that stuff that we talked about towards the beginning of the year. Now, again, for the United States, though, it's about 5%. That's where we're at. So things that'll end up changing that, like say, for example, if the United States started implementing a stronger social safety net, right? Stronger unemployment benefits, something like that, then we would very much shift our long-run Phillips curve to the right. Because we would be at a point where our natural rate of unemployment would be higher. Or if, we stripped those away, you took away that social safety net, then we would see our long-run Phillips curve shift to the left. So that said, oh, there we go. So increases in the natural rate of unemployment shifted to the right. Again, that could be like stronger social safety nets, increases. Sorry, that'd be, no, that would be increases. I apologize. And then decreases in the natural rate of unemployment. That would be our internet, our stuff that makes it easier to find jobs. That would end up doing that. Short run Phillips curve then, what does this represent? So, and this is especially interesting given our current times. This is going to be one of the more debated parts of our course, I guess you could say. There's a lot of people that say that yes, there is trade-offs between unemployment and inflation, but they're not quite as clear as the Phillips curve tries to make it out to be. For our course, I mean, really, the reality of it is it's an academic study. Everything we look at is an academic study. That's why we use straight lines instead of curved ones, et cetera, et cetera. So I wouldn't put too much thought into that just yet. But for the most part, what they do agree on is that there are definitely short-term trade-offs between unemployment and inflation. The majority of the debate comes especially once you start moving towards the long run, but they don't necessarily believe the whole fact that the short run relates back to that. But that said, and just because of how much of a debate this is, like once he had come up with this idea of the long run Phillips curve, I mean, he won a Nobel Prize for it. Like that was a huge revolutionary concept at the time. So pretty wild stuff there. So anyway, short run Phillips curve again, downward sloping, and we see like as an economy starts moving, right, we end up having shifts of the short run Phillips curve. A lot of the stuff related to this then, as we're going to see, are things that also end up impacting the short run aggregate supply. So for example, something that might increase our short run aggregate supply to shift it to the right would be something that would shift our short run Phillips curve, would shift our short run aggregate supply to the left. So again, this is where the history part would come in handy, but say if OPEC engaged another oil embargo, that's what this would be right here. Our short run Phillips curve would end up shifting to the right because of that. Because what we're going to see is at every single point here, there's going to be more more of a trade-off, I guess you could say, right, as we're shifting to the right here. So here's where we end up relating it back, like I said. So changes on this model then can be mirrored between the aggregate model, the ASAD model, and the Phillips curve. Now, again, they don't necessarily represent the same things. The Phillips curve is more specific, but there are some very distinct relations that you can make between the two. And the best way to think of it, and this is one of the really big ideas for this, if you know you're doing your notes, is that they are mirror images, right? They're like looking in a mirror. So there should be an example in here, but we'll see. So the idea is that as again, if our short run aggregate supply is going to decrease, then we'll see an increase in our short run Phillips curve, and so on and so forth. Or if there was an increase in the short run aggregate supply, then there'd be a decrease in the short run Phillips curve. Because essentially, as our economy is able to more effectively produce things, it makes our Phillips curve better in a sense that we'll have less inflation and less unemployment. So yes, we do have our comparison here. In case you guys can't see it, here I'll shrink it just a little bit so you can see the graphing. There we go. So again, over here on our left, we have our aggregate ADAS model. So we have our price level versus our real GDP. And then over here for our Phillips curve, we have our inflation and our unemployment. So let's go ahead and look at that. So they're starting off with aggregate demand. I don't really like that. I really wish they would have started off with aggregate supply, but that's fine. Okay, so the idea is that the short run Phillips curve again and the short run aggregate supply, they're kind of mirrors of one another. So everything that's happening over here or everything that's happening over here will have the opposite effect on the other side of it, right? So for example, with this then, we're starting with our yellow one, our yellow point right here. And again, we're starting with our yellow point right here. So as we increase aggregate demand, we end up moving along this curve here, right? We end up moving up the short run aggregate supply, and we also move up the short run Phillips curve. And what's happening with this is that unemployment is decreasing and inflation is increasing. And we've talked about this the whole semester. This is just a new way of looking at this, right? Because again, price level, as I've mentioned many times before, is kind of a fancy way of saying inflation, right? If everything's going up in price, then yeah, it's kind of inflation. And then also down here, we've also mentioned many times that real GDP is in a lot of ways a fancy way of saying how many people are employed, right? So as we're able to produce more and have a higher real GDP, that means more people are working. And as there's more people that are working, as we have higher employment rates, we have lower unemployment rates. So as we'll see then, increases in aggregate demand will result in decreases in unemployment and increases in inflation. Now, a decrease in aggregate demand here will end up being the exact opposite, right? So again, we're going from yellow to red. And as we have our decrease in aggregate demand, so this could be a contractionary monetary policy or a contractionary fiscal policy. Monetary is a more realistic one. What we'll see then is that our price level goes down. And as our price level goes down, so too does inflation. Like I said, in a lot of ways, it's just kind of a fancy way of saying that. And then our GDP is also going down. And as GDP goes down, there's less people with jobs, meaning that unemployment's going up. So again, it's kind of this mirror image here of what's going on. Now, the better example of it is when they shift. Here we go, the short run aggregate supply. This is what I like to see a bit better. So that said, let's look at this. So this time we're going from black to yellow. So with this is where we start getting the Long and Phillips curve into play, especially, is that so starting out, we're operating right here, which is a recessionary gap, which means unemployment's too high, inflation. Oh wait, yeah, I mean it is, but usually we would focus on fixing aggregate demand. So this is something that's kind of outside of our control happening in a way, but either way, it's fine. So that said, so right now we're going from here to here, and as we do that, price level is going to go down, which means inflation or price level will go down, as we'll see as we go from this point to this point here. And with that, our unemployment will go down as well because we're having an increased output. We're going from a lower amount of real GDP to a higher amount of real GDP. And we see that on the curve here. So again, it being a mirror, the exact opposite thing is going to happen, right? So you can see that as short run aggregate supply is going to increase, our or shift to the right, our short run Phillips curve is going to do the exact opposite, right? Because it's a mirror. it's going to shift to the left. So when this goes to the right, this goes to the left. And that's, again, big idea for this. You know, they're mirrors of one another. The short-run aggregate supply is a mirror of the short-run Phillips curve and vice versa. So whenever you're moving one line, the other line is very much moving as well. This will be the different change here, again, going from black to yellow. So again, short-run, this, as we mentioned before when we were originally covering this, the worst thing that can happen in an economy pretty much is this shift of the short-run aggregate supply from right to left. Because what ends up happening is price level goes up and GDP goes down. And this over here then is going to kind of be the explanation of why that is. Because what we're going to see is that as price level is going up, inflation is going up. And as GDP is going down, unemployment is going up. So we have both of our bad indicators there that are then working against us. So it could be different things related to this, not just OPEC engaging in another embargo. Input prices is really the biggest one, most definitely. Productivity could be another one, like you get a bunch of factories wiped out, something like that. But it being short run implies that it's not necessarily going to be increased regulation. Inflationary expectations, yes, it can do it, but it's not usually going to end up happening in this way for it to decrease in such a drastic number anyway. And same thing with taxes. I mean, it's the same thing as regulation in a lot of ways, is that that's a big structural change. So with this, I would definitely focus on being input prices or productivity or whatever else it might be. So in summary then, one of the big ideas, all right, there's these trade-offs between unemployment and inflation. And then in the long run, there is no trade-off between them. And with that, we have a vertical line with it. Now, there's another name for it, which is the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, which pretty much says that, well, there's no trade-off, right? Because it is the point that we cross at which it then starts, well, getting out of hand. And then again, the mirror of the short-run aggregate supply there. So that's all I got for you here for the Phillips curve. Got any questions, let me know. Make sure you're filling out the 4, 3, 2, 1, and I wish you the best.